Welcome to Talking About the Tenenbaums.
We are here to dig deep into heartbreak and talk about all of the characters and the heartbreaks experienced throughout the movie.
Welcome to our podcast. If you haven't watched the movie, or maybe you are wanting to dig deeper into the complex lives of the movie's characters, you've come to the right place. We hope you'll have enjoyed this episode.
I'm Jackson.
I'm Alicia.
I'm Caroline.
And I'm Jordan.
Today's episode is sponsored by Professor Adam Deal, so let's get into it.
But before we start, a fun fact about the word Tannenbaum. The word Tannenbaum is a German word meaning Christmas tree, and the Christmas tree was introduced into American Christmas traditions by Prince Albert during the reign of Queen Victoria.
Today we are going to be answering some crucial questions about the movie. The first one is, the film begins with a description of the family. What character seems most heartbroken in the childhood portion of the film? Out of the three children, I believe that Margot felt the most heartbroken during her childhood. It's because it became known that she was adopted because her father made it apparent to everyone they met and reminded her constantly that she was not his blood. Along with her being adopted, he never supported her dreams like he did with her brothers. There was a scene where she hosted a play that she wrote herself. Royal did show up, but he told her it was not good. He treated her more as a background character in his life, not like his real children.
Oh, I think we just repeated. One thing to add is that Royal never took Margaret anywhere or anything, so he also just left her out of his life and out of the life of her stepbrothers, which is also a really sad event.
And yeah, I think that just goes back to her being adopted. I think in general, Margot struggled her whole life not feeling like she was truly part of the family because she was the only one that was adopted. She was not blood. And then her dysfunctional relationship with her dad just kind of played into that throughout her life, which I think contributed a lot to her depression and feeling like she didn't belong.
And also, there was times where Chaz seemed upset where Richie was brought to do certain things. So there was some heartbreak there, but I think it was mainly around Margot because she wasn't really like a child that was supported by her father. Like you could really tell, like especially in the scene where he came to her play, like he looked at her and was like, that was not good.
Right.
Like who tells their young child that all of their hard work was nothing?
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing is that I've realized she's the only daughter. So raising children as a parent, you deal with all these boys, and boys are so much easier in adolescent stage. And then you go with a girl, you don't know how to deal with her problems. You don't know how to deal with her hormones and different things that females are dealing with at that age. So I think that's a crucial role. And also, she doesn't look like any of them. She's blonde. Everybody else is brunette, and they just look all different than her.
Yes, and also to really wrap up and show that she felt separated from everyone else, well, she ran away at one point. There was a point where she ran away to go find her real family, and so that showed that she did feel separated from everyone else and kind of abandoned because she was adopted.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Okay, so our next question, we're going to discuss the music in the Royal Tenenbaums. From Hey Jude to Christmas Time is Here, the songs on the soundtrack all play at significant moments for the characters. How do we feel like the music enhances the movie? So I do feel like the entire soundtrack from the Royal Tenenbaums definitely enhances the overall theme to the movie. The musical selections during critical moments in the film help set the mood and enhance the environment surrounding the scenes. For the first example is when Margot gets off the bus and sees Richie again for the first time. The song These Days by Nico begins to play. It's in that moment that everything suddenly moves into slow motion, which really helps give the viewer an idea of how emotional that reunion is. It's more than a sister arriving to pick her brother up. The music and the cinematography in this scene really give the viewer a glimpse of their relationship and what their reunion means to them both. They both pause for a brief and powerful embrace with each other, and the music starts back up again. And I just feel like without this song, it would be harder to convey how intimate that moment in particular was for the two characters. Kind of in contrast, a much different scene in Richie's suicide scene. The song Needle in the Hay by Elliott Smith starts to play. The song's slow and somber tempo matches perfectly with the scene as we see Richie slowly removing his signature sunglasses and his headband and begins to cut off all of his hair. The music just starts to speed back up as he slits his wrist. We see the blood running down the sink and he goes to the floor. The music pauses when he's discovered, and then almost immediately the music starts back again. But at that point, we're already in the hospital, and there's a frantic rush through the hospital trying to save his life. And then the camera will cut to small glimpses of each family member's initial reactions to the news. So I just feel like that the music there just kind of helps you really grasp what's happening. And then, of course, in the final scene of the funeral, none of the characters actually speak, but the camera pans to each character as they view the casket in its final resting place, and then the song Everyone by Van Morrison begins to play, which gives you the sense of conclusion to the story, the movie in general. The song helps give the viewer some closure to the movie and the storylines without ever any words actually being said. And then the characters slowly exit the cemetery as the song continues to play, which just kind of signifies the conclusion of the movie. So what do we think, Jackson?
In the movie, I like the bits of silence. As much as the music is nice and is lovely, but I also like the parts where the music stops and then it's silent, and then it's like it sort of makes you have to refocus on the movie. You know, it's like it centers you again.
Yeah. Jordan?
Another thing is whenever you listen to the music later on without watching the movie, you have that emotional connection of what you were visually paying attention to, so you have the connection of, oh, that song that I heard from Royal Tenenbaums and Richie's suicide, that means a lot to me. So you make these connections throughout the movie with the music.
Yeah.
And also, I really like how you start to feel the emotions yourself, because like you can definitely see how the characters are feeling through the music. But like especially during when Richie is trying to commit suicide, I started feeling heartbroken myself because the music really just kind of put me down along with his actions. And so I feel we were feeling the same thing, even though he's the one in the movie and I'm the one that's just sitting there watching it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's a good point because the movie itself is kind of flippant and it's like this dark comedy type thing, and there's a couple moments in the movie, but that was the first one, is his suicide scene. It kind of hits you and you're like, oh God, okay, it's been a kind of a weird flippant kind of movie, but now this is like it really kind of hits you and it's hard. But yeah, no, that's great.
All right, the next question we're going to talk about is, before they all move back into the house, do any of the characters have healthy relationships? In my opinion, I don't see any of the characters having healthy relationships whatsoever. Before moving back into the house, each character has their own life and separate situations that are equally negative on them. Richie is seen being on a boat in the middle of nowhere, writing a letter to Eli admitting his love for Margot. So he's in a state of confusion, but he still is strong-willed on his feelings towards something that essentially can never possibly happen. As a viewer, we can acknowledge that Richie has attempted to distract himself from depressing thoughts by traveling, but has yet failed to succeed that. Another character that stood out to me was Eli Cash and his drug addiction and living a manic lifestyle. His relationship with Richie is deceiving, as he acts like he's a trustworthy best friend, but actively betrays Richie as he sleeps with the woman Richie openly admitted to being in love with. Eli and Richie stood out the most to me for having relationship problems. Another one would be Margot being in a marriage that is boring and nothing of her liking whatsoever. She keeps secrets, not only to her husband, but everybody else she has a relationship with. Her act of adultery is not played out as one would imagine it. When moving into the house, she hooks up with Eli, but does not seem to actually be fazed by it at all, as if love is not in her capability. Although we do see Margot show signs of true love towards the end of the film, she develops a relationship with someone else. She knows that it can ultimately accept her. The last character of not having a positive relationship would be Chaz. Chaz went through heartbreak early on before the movie took place, with his wife dying in a plane crash, and ever since then, He has had an incredible paranoia with protecting his children. Ari and Uzi are two of his sons, and his relationships with them is even as confusing as Chaz's relationship with everybody else in the household. As a father, he wants to do the best for his kids, but it comes to a point where he's doing way too much.
I think another kind of relationship that's not really healthy but could be seen as like a friendship would be Royal and the guy who stabbed him, even though he did stab him in the beginning, but he ended up being there for Royal for like whenever he was lying to the family. He helped him, which isn't a healthy relationship, but it was a positive friendship.
Yeah.
Not towards anybody else, but they were
Getting
there.
stabbed's healthy.
Yeah, they were there for each other, and then at the end, he stabs him once again.
It's totally normal. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Totally cool and normal.
So we all do that, right? You know? Yeah, I don't really think anybody had. I mean, I think you could see the mom having somewhat of a healthy relationship with her, I guess, fiance, boyfriend, but even then, like, they couldn't really live their relationship how they wanted to. It's just one big dysfunctional mess.
And one thing we never saw was like Chaz's marriage with his
Right.
wife, so they could have had this nice, healthy relationship.
Yeah.
But since this movie isn't really about healthy and happy,
Yeah.
it doesn't really go into that. So we
Yeah.
never see if they were happy before she died.
We can sort of say that this movie is the fast food of relationships. You know, it may seem okay at the beginning, but once you ingest it and get it into your system, you just feel bad and depressed, and you feel like you need to go to a gym or at least
Regrets
take a
are
walk
had.
or something. You know, go outside. Yes, exactly. Regrets are here. They have happened.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, and so number 4, in a sense, all the characters are protagonists in the film. What character seems most memorable to you, and why so? For me, the most memorable character was Royal Tenenbaum, and that is just simply because he makes the movie. And you have to agree, because if it wasn't for him being flat broke and being jealous that his wife was moving on, it never would have happened. These events never would have taken place. He faked having cancer, for crying out loud. I mean, what sort of egotistical maniac fakes having cancer? You know, causes the family to break down in tears and just to say, I'm faking it. I'm not dying. I would have killed him. I would have been Pagoda to stab him with the knife. You know, I would have had very choice words to say. But also, there's also something else in the movie that, you know, on reflection, I've noticed, and that is that he's a manipulator. He uses the emotions of people. He likes to pit people against one another, and the best example is using Chaz's sons, you know, to get a relationship with them, to manipulate the father, to receive, no, not to receive, but to get out of a situation to where he can get into the minds of his grandchildren. And so I see that as manipulative behavior. And then also we could say that he used Pagoda. Let's face it, you know, Pagoda was not employed by Royal anymore. He was employed by the wife, Etheline.
Yeah.
So he used his connection with Pagoda to get back into the family. He then continued to use Pagoda as a cover to be able to stay in the house, you know, get sort of like the medicine, which we would learn were mints, for crying out loud. I mean, the whole, you know, it was perfect. It was just sleazy. And so he was a manipulator, and that's all that there is to it. You see, and that money will make you do very interesting things. And then also, he played the victim. I mean, if anyone played the victim, it was him. And we can almost sort of say that he was the person that was least suffering from mental illness, you know, out of them all. But yeah, he was the one playing the victim. It was just sort of crazy. I mean, what do y'all think about this? Or do you disagree and think that there was another character that was more fundamental?
I feel like he was kind of the antagonist that kind of drew everybody towards having attention towards all the other protagonists, even though everything he did was negative and everything he did was manipulative and a lie and things like that. But the whole movie wouldn't have been able to be a movie without his deed and his things that he was doing. So in theory, I think he was kind of an antagonist, but everybody grew to accept him as the antagonist, even though he wasn't doing like complete acts of like negative things. But
Yeah.
And I really think he is like the main character. The movie's called his name.
Yeah.
So he definitely is like this big character, and he's the one that brought them together. Because if he hadn't faked his cancer and acted like a crazy person, none of them would have came together. None of them would have had their bonding moments and then their other heartbreak experiments. And like the movie really wouldn't have happened if he hadn't acted like a crazy person.
Yeah, and I think for me anyway, I mean, obviously he is a pivotal character, but I didn't really connect until the very end. And I think it kind of goes back to when we were talking about heartbreaks. Like, it just kind of hits you at the end when you realize how valuable he is and what he kind of meant to the overall story and how he touched each character. The whole movie, you're kind of like, I'm focusing on whoever's in that scene and whatever storyline's being, portrayed at that moment. But then it's like at the end that it comes full circle and you're just like, wow, like Royal truly is like the character of the story. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now time for a quick word from our sponsor.
Are you tired of the same boring happy endings?
Are you tired of always finding the silver linings from stories?
Do you hate kittens, laughing children, or riding off into the sunset?
Then we have the perfect solution for you.
Take a class with Professor Adam Deal.
Professor Deal will take that optimistic and hopeful outlook on love and relationships and teach you the truth about the world, what really becomes of the brokenhearted.
One of our many satisfied customers says, before this class, I was a happy-go-lucky and always saw the silver lining in life. After taking Professor Deal's class, I'm struck with the reality and truth in life that we are all doomed for heartbreak.
Sign up now and don't delay. There are only a few spots left for this limited time opportunity to truly have your heart crushed into a million pieces.
Now we're going to get back to our questions after that amazing word from our sponsors.
Yeah, I mean, you better get it now. I mean, that's
Exactly.
great.
Even though the film begins with a very heartbreaking event, Royal and Etheline's divorce, it's not the only heartbreaking thing. What other events break these characters' hearts as the movie progresses? I think after the divorce, there's kind of a tornado of heartbreak. From each character, there's not one character that doesn't have anything happen to them. They all do. Like, we find out that Chaz's wife dies. That's heartbreaking. And then we can go to Richie, who was the successful tennis player. And then he sees that Margot is now with her new husband, and he loses, and he cries on the court. And then Royal starts disowning him, and he's not the favorite son anymore. And then we can go... the kids, they think their dad's dying. Mm-hmm. He tells them he has cancer. They are all so upset and they decide to all come back home, and then it's heartbreaking to find out their dad isn't dying. He's just dramatic. And then again, Richie finds out all of Margot's past and all of everything she's done, how she smokes, how she's been married to multiple men, how many people she slept with, how she has had a relationship with Eli, his best friend, and then he tries to kill himself, which is, I would say, the biggest heartbreak in the whole movie. And from all of those heartbreaks, there's so many other small ones, but I think those were the main big ones that kind of just come at you.
I disagree. The biggest heartbreak was when the dog died.
Oh, yeah, that got me.
Yes.
That got me. Yeah.
You know that a movie is actually the most evil sort of movie.
It was terrible.
When they killed, and by a car no less, just smashed, crushed in the side of the house. I had to pause the movie.
Yeah.
I had to get up. I had to walk around for a second.
Literal
because
tears.
Yes, they killed the dog. There are no words.
Like,
for
why?
it.
Why did the dog have to die? I don't understand.
He survived the plane crash.
I know. So yeah, for me, the heartbreak was the death of the dog. Rest in peace.
Well, and I think in this movie, I think what's great about this movie, as weird as it is there's so many different types of heartbreak going on. Mm-hmm. And I think that we can relate to that because everyone, whether it's an active or in the past or in the future, everyone's going to experience heartbreak to some degree. And it might be related to your profession, like you see with Richie's tennis career. It might be a really heartbreaking, like the loss of a family member, a spouse, a parent, a child, anything like that. And so I think what in this movie, you just just have all these varying degrees of heartbreak in there that it might obviously not be the same thing that you're going through, but it gives the viewer a way to somehow relate to at least one of those heartbreaks and kind of how it's dealt with.
Yeah.
All right, so our next question is going to be, Richie's suicide attempt is the most obvious demonstration of depression. Do you think other characters are depressed in this film? Well, just like we just talked about, as every character is dealing with their own heartbreak, I think every character in this movie is dealing with depression. I think what is great about this movie is how it showcases depression and the many forms that it can take. Depression looks so different on everyone, and everyone deals with depression differently. We see varying degrees of depression in every character. Obviously, in particular with Richie, he seems isolated and lonely throughout the movie. We see that when he leaves after his breakdown on the tennis court, but then he just kind of leaves and removes himself from everything. I feel like we kind of saw his suicide building throughout the movie, as opposed to maybe some of the others. I guess we could argue some of the other, Margot, we could have maybe seen her committing suicide as well, but I feel like we saw that building with Richie. We see him still wearing his signature tennis headband and his glasses long after his career has been over, which is indicative to just holding on to your past and not wanting to let that go or move forward. And we see the same with the other characters as well. In Chaz, he and his sons all dress the same. Obviously, the loss of his wife has left him heartbroken and depressed, but we see him kind of dealing with it in an unhealthy way because he's constantly keeping his boys close and he's extremely overprotective, for fear of losing them. He's not dealing with the loss or dealing with the depression from losing his wife. He's just keeping his boys right beside him so he doesn't lose them as well. And then just like as we've discussed earlier, Margot just seems to never really fit in with the family. And it's clear, even as a child, that she was battling with depression. So it's something she's just been dealing with her whole life. She doesn't feel like she's part of the family. She's dealt with disappointing marriages. She's lost Richie, who is the love of her life, and then her tumultuous relationship with her father throughout the movie.
I think another character that would add on to that is Etheline, and how all she wants to do is get away from Royal, and she has found this man who actually makes her happy and treats her well, and Royal comes in and is like, I'm staying here, I'm dying of cancer, I'm moving back in, and it just kind of puts a toll on Etheline because she's like, what do I do now? I can't divorce him, he's dying. Mm-hmm. And so she's trying to find happiness by moving on, but she's being pulled back into that old place with Royal where she's kind of stuck.
Yeah.
I would say another two characters would be Chaz's sons, Ari and Uzi. They don't get to have their own identity by dressing however they want to dress. I feel like they're manipulated in Chaz's idea of how they should be. And at the beginning when they were doing the fire drills, like whenever Chaz would wake them up, they would moan and groan about getting up for another fire drill. Like, it's obviously Chaz's depression is obviously bringing them down. So I would think in children's lives, the way they're brought up affects the way they're going to live the rest of their life. So I think that is a big part of their lives as well.
Well, I say that they're all cuckoo with the exception of Etheline. Etheline was the most calm person in the entire movie. If she had mental illness or depression, she didn't show it. I wouldn't say her fiance, and that's just because he sort of went crazy with insecurity, we can say.
Yeah.
Because he then started formulating plans of his own, right?
Yeah.
But so aside from Etheline, they were just crackers.
It's all just.
And when I say crackers, I mean crazy, loony.
Yes.
Loony. Sorry, British terms sometimes get Americans in trouble.
I think with Henry, I feel like he's already coped with his depression because he stated that his wife died of cancer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like he's already healed from that, but he's obviously still going on with life, so other things come up. But I just feel like he's probably the lesser of depressed of everybody else. And Pagoda, which you can't really read Pagoda. I feel like he's kind of the comic relief and everything. Just how funny he is, but He could be miserable the whole time. He
could.
could hate Royal, and they must be dragging him along. No,
Well,
really
people use
idea.
humor to cope with depression too. So.
Yeah.
But one thing that I will say is that he hasn't really shed his Indian identity, though. I mean, there was this one scene in the movie where he was laying back in something, and he was reading something. Remember the little pamphlet? It was in Hindi.
Yeah.
So
And the music was Hindi that was playing during. Yeah.
Right, so he too is also stuck in the past.
Yes.
So
yes.
so he was on the elbow of nostalgia, if you will.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
All right, the next question we're going to talk about is seeing overlaps between this film and any other works we've discussed this semester. In my opinion, I think it relates to Amy Winehouse a lot because Eli would refer to her drug addiction and her ways of coping with depression with drugs. I would think Richie and Margot's relationship would hint towards Amy and Blake's relationship because they love each other, but it's kind of like they're doomed to be together. So they essentially can never be together, not just because they're brother and sister, but because they're toxic people. Another person I would relate Amy to would be Margot. I feel like she keeps a lot of secrets, and she kept a lot away from her parents and things like that just because she didn't want to deal with it. She didn't want to have to tell them, I have a manic problem with drugs and alcohol. She'd rather push it to the side and deal with it later, which essentially hurt her in the end. Another character I would say possibly Chaz with reliving the past. I felt like she never could get over anything, so she kept reliving it and trying to recope with it, and it never really worked out. But yeah, anybody have any other opinions?
No, I think that's an excellent comparison. I think you can take parts of each of Amy's songs and find different parts of the movie where that can relate to.
And you can also see it as like a lot of, especially with like Margot, she uses her plays as a form of art and a way to kind of, where she, at the end she had that one play that was kind of to express some feelings, where all of Amy's songs are very emotional and are very transparent towards how she is feeling with different relationships.
Or I don't know if it was in the documentary or not, but there was a clip of her at one of her last performances where she was intensely intoxicated. And I feel like that kind of sheds light on Richie's meltdown in the middle of the tennis match. Was kind of, they were doing what they loved, but something had happened mentally that destroyed that moment for them. That was a really big performance for her, that she got booed off the stage.
Right.
And essentially Richie got shunned for doing all of
Yeah.
that.
Right, yeah.
I totally agree with everything, and it's just, yes, Amy Winehouse and Back to Black, that album fits the whole thing. The whole kit and caboodle.
All right.
Okay, well, number 8, Wes Anderson's movies can be hard to describe. How would you describe this movie if you were recommending it to a friend or family member? It's weird. It is a weird movie. In sort of some ways, it's reminiscent of Mrs. Dalloway and how you jump from person to person, perspective to perspective. Except in this case, you can actually understand what's happening, and you can separate between what's in the mind and what's actually happening. As I made in my notes, is a flurry of discombobulation. Yes.
So you would recommend it to somebody, or
Let's
would you
see.
know?
Now, I would recommend it to a very special sort of person. The sort of person that enjoys insanity, chaos, all wrapped around in like a band of professionality. That is how I would. That sort of. It's not an everyone sort of movie. It's not a movie that you want to go flying off the handlebars and say, it's the best movie ever, ringing bells, dun 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 dun. You have to watch. No, this is like a sort of movie that you would recommend to that one friend that you sort of leave off in the corner. You don't disown them, but you're like, they're there.
Also, another person you can recommend it to is a person that always likes to be right about movies and likes to dissect movies and are like, oh, this is the true meaning. This is what's really happening. Be like, here's this movie. Dissect this one. You figure out this one and then come back to me in maybe 3 days once you've watched it 10 times. Then we'll discuss it.
Yeah, okay.
Since you want to always be right, here you go.
Yeah, I like, how do you even describe this? So I watched it with my boyfriend, and we both heard of the movie, but we had never watched it. And it was like the beginning, I would say maybe the first 20, 30 minutes. We both kept looking at each other, and he's like, do we have to finish this? And I'm like, we do. It's fine. Just suffer through this. You know, this is like something you watch on a Tuesday night when there's nothing else going on. But I'm like, I have to obviously watch this. And then, like, what I kind of think was unique is, like, we were silent through a lot of it. And I think that turned into, okay, well, we may not be loving it, but we're into it now. We're into the character stories. And then at the end, you know, when it was over, we turned it off and we just kind of looked at each other and we were like, that was good. That was good. But I don't think it's a movie I'll ever watch again. So I think it's one of those movies, like, it's not going to become your, like, all-time favorite. I want to watch it all the time and share it with everyone. But I don't think it hurts to just watch it once. You just maybe rent it. Don't buy it. Don't buy the DVD.
It's very adult understanding. Like, if you watched it and a child was with you, they could watch it without being scarred for life. I feel like there's a lot of adult hints that, like, you wouldn't understand if you were a child. So, child watching it, maybe not the Richie suicide scene watching that, but I don't know. I wouldn't watch it with a kid no matter what, just because of the things, but I would recommend it to close friends that would understand this type of movie.
Yeah.
Maybe not the suicide or the incest
Yeah.
or the dog dying.
Yeah, not the dog.
But yeah, I can see that.
So the moral of the story is watch it once. Watch it once. It's like a rite of passage. Watch it once.
Yeah.
So yeah, that just kind of brings us to our conclusion here on should this film be taught in the next course. So just kind of how we've discussed, I think as individuals, we all to some varying degree enjoyed the movie and we enjoyed talking about it in class and talking about it in our group. It was a great addition to the material that we've already studied, just as we discussed earlier, like with Jordan connecting it to Amy Winehouse. We definitely see a lot of the connections. You can see connections with Van Gogh. You can definitely see how all of the material has kind of, you know, related to each other. But the movie connected well with other content from the class, and it painted a more straightforward picture, in my opinion, of heartbreak and depression. But for the movie as a whole, I think the suicide aspect of the movie can possibly be triggering for some students. So maybe a disclaimer or just letting the students know that there is a suicide scene in there before it's taught again. And then as college students, we were definitely on the more mature side aspect as far as being able to handle the content of the movie. And it's, you know, definitely probably not something that would be appropriate to teach to high school students. But yeah, I think it does a great job highlighting the different aspects of depression and how people deal with depression differently and have different ways to cope with mental illness.
I really like how Deal dealt with a visual way of learning, which was the movie, and audio, which was listening, and then the reading part aspect. He deals with all these forms of art, which I think you have to put a movie when you deal with listening to music, reading books, things like that. You kind of are missing this piece, and some people learn better from watching movies, and people make different connections from it. So I definitely think there should be a movie, whether or not it's this one, sure, but I think it's a good fit for the course.
I think this would be a good movie for the course because a lot of movies, they do have like sad moments, but they're like more sappy. And it's more like a romance movie, like, oh, she lost the guy. Oh no. Where this one, it's more like, there's this kind of depression, you can have heartbreaks in this kind of way. Oh, people cope it with this kind of way. They do this and that and this. So it gives a whole variety of all the different kind of heartbreaks that we saw throughout our whole class.
Yeah.
Definitely more real with the whole incest part. It's not, there's not a lot.
I mean, not technically incest, but it's still icky. Like,
Yeah,
I
it's
don't want to make out with my stepbrother.
Something you question. You
or
don't see it in other movies because it's very frowned upon, but having it in here, it's kind of like, well, I mean, it's not that bad, but it's still something you shouldn't do. But
yeah. No, I think the movie takes on that kind of dark humor, but then mixes it in with depression. And even though the storylines, to us anyway, are like super extreme, it's still, I feel like there's some storyline somewhere in that movie that everybody can somewhat connect to, you know? I mean, no, maybe you never wanted to make out with your brother, but maybe there was a person in your life that you wanted, but then you just ultimately knew that would never work. So I just feel like it does allow for that, which, you know, I think is helpful.
Yeah.
Dare we say it's a movie that everyone can universally relate to?
Are we saying that? we saying that?
And that's what it sort of sounds like we're saying.
Gosh.
Everyone could somehow relate to this movie.
It's almost like Professor Deal knows what he's doing, and he knew what he was doing when he picked this movie. So, yeah, in conclusion, we're wishy-washy about the whole thing, but,
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. As a collective, we have no idea what we're doing. Or what we recommend. How about that?
Yeah.
Either way, it's been fun. It's been fun. So,
Yes.
well, guys, I think this is probably it for the podcast then.
Yes, we'd like to thank our sponsor one more time, Adam Deal.
Definitely.
Remember, take his class if you really just want to.
Kick kittens.
Yes, kick kittens.
Kick kittens
No
and
more
just,
happy endings.
just take that frown or take your smile and turn it into a frown. That's what you got to do there. So,
Reality.
all right. Well, thanks for listening to our podcast and, keep the heartbreaks coming, I guess.
Peace.